whenever you're about to do something, or if you catch yourself doing something, you can run it through that simple check. Did I previously say I was going to do this? Because if not, it's new and it's unnecessary. If you could just deliver on the things you said to yourself and others that you were going to do, it would make a huge difference in your life.
You are now listening to the Creative Juice podcast, brought to you by IndiePRO.io.
What's up, Indies? Welcome back to the Creative Juice podcast. This is episode 340. Today, we're going to be talking about wild, creative music marketing ideas and how to build them in such a way that they work. I'm your host, Jack McCarthy. With me is Circa. Cirque, what's up, dude? I'm excited to brain blast on this episode with you a little bit.
I'm pretty excited. Let's go.
Me too, man. Me too. If you guys are like us, and you probably are if you've been tuning in and listening to this podcast for any length of time, even if today is your first day, if you're anything like us, you probably find yourself to be wildly creative in all areas of your music career, including your marketing. And that's amazing. That's kind of what it's all about. We've talked about that quite a bit on the podcast as of late, talking about how your marketing is an extension of your creativity. And especially as you're starting out, what your marketing can really do for you as you're planning it and executing on it, it allows you to flex creative muscles that maybe you didn't get to before. With that can sometimes come a little bit of confusion or a little bit of a wall where it's like, oh, I've got these crazy cool ideas and I want to execute, but I'm not really sure if they're going to work for me. I'm not really sure how they apply to my music career. And this is something that we've come across quite a bit over a number of years of working with artists, consulting with artists and bands, helping them come up with marketing strategies, is we get carried away sometimes with our creative ideas, and it's helpful to contextualize them a bit into the fundamentals of marketing to help you see, what results they can actually work to drive for you. And that's what we're going to be talking about here today. Help you tame your creative ideas and fit them into a context that actually helps you get the results that you're hoping for.
Yeah, I think it's a useful thing that we're going to go over today. If you're out there and you're at the beginning of trying to learn the skill of like marketing your music or building a business around your creativity, this will be helpful in like avoiding pitfalls and like optimizing your learning. Like, how can you, as quick as possible, get to a point where you're fluent? But also, even if you're further along, this can help you sort of focus on what's important or make sure you shore up the things that you might be weak in.
For sure, yeah. I think this is especially helpful to talk about because when you can think about your marketing ideas, how you might want to get your music out there, how you want to grow your fan base, get more customers, grow revenue in your business, you can get really creative. And, there's a lot of shiny objects. There are things that pull your attention in different directions. And so I've always found it really helpful to ground any ideas that might come to your head in, marketing foundations, fundamentals, the baseline of what you're building your audience upon. So then you can decide, is this idea that I'm thinking about or brainstorming on actually going to help me? And maybe it would be useful to give a bit of context or a bit of a story to share or illustrate how this might play out. I've talked to plenty of artists over the years who they've got really cool, big ideas, right? Massive ideas of how they want to grow. Long time ago, just as one example, I was consulting with an artist who was thinking about working with us at the agency, and they were really just getting started with building an audience online. They were launching a new project, and they wanted to build up their audience. They wanted to build up awareness. They wanted to build up an email list, a text list, and they wanted to start to get customers. They really were starting from ground zero. And we had a number of conversations about the strategies that they could pull out to do that. Things that they could do, how they could structure their releases, and they had some good campaign ideas under their belt to start rolling out. A few months later, having, started to just scratch the surface, I had a conversation with that same artist who was like, hey man, I've got this crazy idea. I'm talking with these blockchain developers and we're going to do this big launch. And I really think that it could make me a ton of money. And I got off the phone and I was like, man, that guy is going down a path that I think is going to disappoint him, because his big idea that was kind of being sold to him by whoever he was talking to in music and blockchain and, shiny object over here land had no grounding in the foundations that he was trying to build in the first place.
Yeah, I think like a useful mnemonic that's helped me out comes from boy Alex Hermosi, but recently it's been like a good mantra for me is I will only do what I already said I was going to do. So you can always, whenever you're about to do something, or if you catch yourself doing something, you can run it through that simple check. Did I previously say I was going to do this? Because if not, it's new and it's unnecessary, right? Like if you could just deliver on the things you said to yourself and others that you were going to do, it would make a huge difference in your life. And I think that applies here, right? Starting up completely new lines of inquiry or development is generally gets you bogged down. Certainly like for an artist, like starting up a blockchain venture as a means of monetization is like out there. It's out there in left field.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. And that's a really good point about the things that you say you're going to do and using that as a measure against anything new that might come to your brain or be presented to you, new opportunities, which I think is something else we could talk about here is artists are constantly being served opportunities on a silver platter, and opportunities are in hard quotes here because not every opportunity, in fact, most opportunities that are presented to you when you're trying to just grow and start to build an audience and probably start to monetize it, a lot of the opportunities that are being shoved in your face really aren't great opportunities anyway, in many, many cases.
Yeah. And also like this, I guess we should introduce this properly, which is that like the point of this episode is to hopefully encourage you to focus on the things that don't seem that exciting. When you're learning marketing, you're learning business. If it seems like it's the fundamentals, good. Focus on the basics. When I was younger, my basketball coach told me to like eat your greens, like do this and that. There's lots of conventional wisdom coming out of gym teachers and coaches. Right. And you wanted to learn like when it comes to weight loss or fitness or whatever, you want to learn like the exciting things, the things that not everyone's telling you, the surprising things. And then you get older and you actually like endeavor to learn how these things work. And you realize like, oh, wait, all the boring stuff is exactly right. All the boring stuff is correct. Calories in, calories out, right? It's really like the only thing that you need to know about when it comes to weight loss. And so like the same applies across the spectrum. Usually, generally, the conventional wisdom is conventional for a reason. The things that you hear over and over again, the boring stuff is boring for a reason. It's established. It works. You're unlikely to find edge in trying to buck the fundamentals. And so if you're learning marketing, like what are the fundamentals here, right? Fundamentals are like, at least in modern marketing, like what is known as like the bread and butter, the meat and potatoes is content marketing. So like creating stuff that people want to watch, read, or listen to. It will never not be a valuable skill to have. When it comes to lots of different areas of marketing, just being able to write proficiently in such a way that generates, captures, and then ideally converts attention. So that is like headlines that get people to stop and read. Being able to transition from that more exciting headline into what you actually want to talk about in such a way that doesn't turn people off. That's a very valuable skill to have. And then being able to transition from that main section into a call to action that actually inspires people to take the action. It's like super important, whether you're writing a video or you're writing an email or you're putting out a social media post, like all these things, or just writing a script for a social media post since it's all video these days. These things are super important, right? Learning like the basics of email marketing, super important. Building landing pages, super important, right? These are all very important things in digital direct response marketing for modern online businesses. They're just not super exciting. You see like, oh, like I can have an AI chat bot on my website. Let's spend 3 weeks trying to configure that, right?
Yeah, the fundamentals aren't sexy or shiny.
Yeah. But like probably the right idea for, and like, and this is like, it doesn't matter what business you're starting, right? If you are trying to, as a solo operator, try to bootstrap something that can be your livelihood, it doesn't matter if it's a music career or, self-publishing or some kind of business, like it doesn't matter. You need to be entrenched in those fundamentals for at least like 2-3 years before you ever even entertain the idea of bringing on something that sounds kind of wacky or new.
Yeah, for sure. So in light of that, I wanted to give you guys a little bit of a frame how you can think about your ideas within. It's kind of a funny idea. Think about your ideas within a framework. But this is how, when I talk with artists about their marketing ideas, when we talk to clients at the agency, when we talk to clients at Indie Founder in our coaching program, the way that we harness creativity and try to squeeze the juice out of it is there's some questions you should ask yourself. You should ask yourself, okay, with this idea that I'm coming up with, let's say it's for a single release, right? Or an album launch. It could be anything, really. Any kind of marketing idea that you might have. When your creativity is flowing, what you want to channel that into and what you want to ask yourself is, and this goes into those 3 create, capture, monetize umbrellas that Cirque just mentioned, is you can ask yourself, what will this idea do for me to generate new audience attention? What will this do to capture people's attention? What will it do to get people looking at me? What will it do with the people that are already looking at me? Will this help me generate new subscribers, text list, email list? What will it do with the people that are already subscribers? And will this help me get more customers? What will it do with the existing customers that I have, if any? What boxes of those 6 that I just mentioned get checked? What's happening in this idea when you ask yourself those questions? Can you answer those questions as it relates to the idea you have? You kind of go through that simple sort of 6-step heuristic and you get an idea of whether your cool new thing that you're planning on can move the needle in a positive direction for you. And this allows you to take ideas that, maybe at the end of things wouldn't really get you a result that you want. And then you can mold them like clay into, okay, I'm asking myself these questions. I don't really have a fan base, let's say. I've got no audience. And I ask myself, okay, this new marketing idea that's in front of me, how's it going to get me more attention? Well, I'm not really sure that it is. Okay, well then I need to take this idea and I need to mold it into something that's going to get me attention. So maybe I change the video that I'm thinking about as it relates to this single release. Maybe I change the way that I'm planning on getting it out there in front of audiences. You can start to take your ideas and again, you contextualize them into these 3 umbrellas, and it helps you to build something that can actually drive you forward.
Yeah, 100%.
I think it's worth mentioning here is like, we get excited about, shiny objects. I think about my friend that was excited about the blockchain opportunity. And like, I was kind of excited for him. He was real stoked. We were having a great conversation about it. And he was very excited. And I get that. One thing that I think artists need to think about when you hear about, big success stories in cool experimental marketing campaigns is there are success stories in experiments, but there is a far higher likelihood of failed experiments among the averages compared to artists that plan campaigns that check the boxes of fundamentals and really work to cultivate an audience that grows.
Yeah, I mean, like, kind of like to give you some standout examples of what we're talking about, right? Perhaps this is a corrupted example because I can think of like counter examples with this one, but one of our agency specialists, Andy Hunter of the band As December Falls, when he came into digital marketing, got exposed through IndiePRO, but also did side learning. Like he didn't just rely on IndiePRO resources. He went and he learned from some of the places Jack and I learned from, like Digital Marketer, and, supplemented his education in this specific domain with more general fundamental advice. Learned tons of ad tech, learned tons of like ad best practices. Now the counterexample is that like he did, yes, in his first year, go ahead and strike up like a Facebook Messenger, like interactive like flow that people clicked into, and they're like having a chat with a pre-configured chat bot in Facebook Messenger. And that is definitely a bit new school. It's not necessarily the fundamentals, but I would say that it was his strength in the fundamentals he gained from supplementing his education that really let him stand out and more importantly, practice basic flows, which is like he wants to sell tickets. He created an offer. He created an ad. Like he focused on how to do that using like fundamental approaches, things that like you would have just as easily like been recommended to do 10 years ago. He had a little bit of new spice on the rice, but ultimately like that's what led him to the promised land. I really do think that like oftentimes people will get frustrated or even before practicing. Like we've seen tons of times indies before actually doing things 1, 2, and 3 will come up with things Z and be like, maybe the answer to me having trepidation about taking the first step is to take 30 steps.
Dude, I'm so glad I was literally just thinking that. It's such a temptation to try to skip points A and B and go all the way to Z. You see it so often. So many indies that I've talked to over the years are tempted by that. And there's no nonstop flight. It just doesn't exist. There's lucky examples, but it's really just luck.
Yeah, 100%.
That is a really good example, though. That is a really good example. And I think a lot of times, going back to what I was talking about regarding a framework, is you can look at your existing starting point as a good way of picking apart your ideas as well. This is a good general example that I think a lot of artists fall into. Is over the years, I've talked to plenty of artists who are like, yeah, I'm going to do a crowdfunding campaign for my album. And I'm like, cool. Who's the crowd? And they don't have fans.
Who's the crowd, dude?
Who's the crowd? And they don't have fans. And they say, well, I'm gonna get my fans to fund it. And I'm like, all right, cool. Who are your like, since you're just starting out, is that like, are you mostly going to your internal network, friends, family, personal acquaintances? And they're like, no way, man. I don't want to do that. And I'm like, well, then again, I have to ask you, who's the crowd? And that's just a simple example of how you can look at your audience and be like, okay, where does my existing audience fit into this idea that I'm coming up with? And if you don't have an audience, you have to ask yourself, where does this idea I'm coming up with fit into the audience that I want to create? That's like, 2 more questions that I would always ask yourself as you come up with creative marketing ideas, especially as they apply to crowdfunding.
Yeah, I think also like if you're telling me like you have tried creating compelling content and like really gave that the old college try. By that, I mean like you spent 6 months researching other creators in your genre and then taking inference from what like successful creators and then taking inference from their successful content, short form videos, and then creating your own versions of those ideas, putting them out on a consistent basis month to month, and then trying out advertising some of those, and then trying out some email marketing or trying out an offer. And you're telling me none of that worked. And now you have an idea for like what's going to work instead. Like, I'll listen. But until you've actually tried the basic things, like you really have no basis on which to say, like, I need to jump to this much more complex thing. And this is like general, like, so don't take the examples I gave as like, oh, it's limited to just this. I mean, like, oftentimes people will assume that the thing that they're being recommended to do will not work and try to jump to some variant of it. And it's like, man, like, I think another, like, where we've seen this like occur again and again and again, because there's this whole period from like 2016 to like very recently and maybe even still, where the founder of ClickFunnels, Russell Brunson, was really giving you like a software platform to create like marketing funnels, but he was also giving like educational resources for like what marketing funnel should you create? What should it look like? And like literal millionaires and decamillionaires were minted off of doing what they called in his community, just do what Russell says. Just do the thing he's saying to do. And almost invariably, the people who actually just followed what he was saying to do to spec created successful webinar funnels and like made tons of money, generated tons of customers, and built businesses. And everyone who tried to like fancy that up or go off script, like
nosedive,
almost invariably fell flat on their face, right?
Yeah.
It was like, wow, like it was so simple. All you had to do during that era was just do what Russell says. Now that strategy is quite saturated. People are kind of like, people have been burned by people doing it badly or just like being dishonest, disreputable business people. And so it's kind of like, marketers ruin everything. And so maybe it doesn't work like it used to. But like for a time there, like that was the conventional wisdom. That was what was being told to people to do. And still a large majority of the people in that community just outright refused to try it or just presumed it wouldn't work or presumed it was already old. And they lost out. They lost out on a huge opportunity.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that. I think that's a tenet of like most e-learning, most coaching programs is like, if you're paying somebody a sum of money to learn something from them, you should listen to what they're saying and try to do it as closely to what they're saying to do. I mean, I've paid plenty of coaches over the last 10 years of my life. Every time I've listened to them and done what they said, I usually make more money than it costs me to pay them. And every time I don't, well, I don't.
Yeah. It's all too common. And so, this isn't just to say that like, I worry that as we're saying this, like I'm not providing you useful examples for what that means about what you should do differently. All I mean to say is that like pick the thing that seems obvious in the recommendation set. So if you're in IndiePRO right now, like pick the thing that seems obvious, pick the thing that's most common and then execute it. Like, and I've done this, right? I have step by step followed tutorial. Like when I was coming up in digital marketing, I didn't go off script, dude. I did exactly what I was recommended to do.
Yeah.
I followed tutorials to spec. And if there was an unclear jump in a tutorial, I hunted down the person who gave the tutorial and I asked them to clarify instead of just like assuming, because I wanted to be sure that I was doing what was recommended so that if it didn't work, I can be sure it's not because I messed something up, right? It's because it just doesn't work.
This shows itself in so many places across things that we talk about as it relates to music marketing. An easy example here is I was having a conversation today with one of the guys on our team about a campaign that was being run on Facebook, a video ad campaign, fan finder style video ad campaign. And he was like, yeah, I mean, like we're running a fan finder on Meta and it's not really getting results, but I assume that that's just because like Facebook ads. And I was like, no, it's not because Facebook ads, dude. What's the video look like? And he was like, well, it's a traditional music video. And I was like, there's your answer, guy. Like, the answer to this. It's not the people on the platform or the platform itself. It's that the content is wrong.
Yeah. I think that the way in which, if you're watching this and you're just starting out, like the way in which this could save you a lot of time is, and this really ties in heavily to like what is known as shiny object syndrome, which itself is like, it's like overused. Like it sounds gross coming out of my mouth even. I hate when people use it, but just to say that
it's fine.
Just to say that like they're the inverse of each other, right? Not focusing on the fundamentals is being entrenched in shiny objects as they come out. And there's this intense feeling of FOMO, especially if you're learning a world that is like a rich ecosystem of information and operations that you were completely unaware of. You feel FOMO because you're like, holy shit, this has all been going on. And I didn't know about it, and everyone else has been doing it for years, and now I'm late.
Yeah.
And so you feel like, this sense of like urgency to like, I need to learn everything.
In some ways, that's good too. Like, and that's kind of what we're talking about here is like steer that feeling because that can drive you to be really creative with ideas and content and how you want to get your music out there and who you want to get it out to, that feeling of FOMO can really drive your creativity. You just need to steer it in the right direction with the right questions.
Well, it just to say that, like, if you're like, for instance, recently I got into way later than I should have. I got into programming and development, like coding, right? And as I'm learning through it, it's like, oh my God, like, why did I wait so long? Everyone in my family is programmers. Like, why was I averse to this? And like a catalyst for that was like, I can talk to AIs now and get them to explain things to me. I don't have to wait for like someone to get back on a message board. And that's a huge catalyst. But in that, I feel this sense of urgency of like, I'm so behind. How do I catch up? But what I'm not doing is presuming that there is some speed up to be had by bucking the tradition. And moreover, what I am presuming is that the stuff I actually have to learn is the stuff that hasn't changed in 30 years. And that's true in marketing. It's true in business. It's true in programming. It's true in music. Most of the best practitioners, 90% of what they use day to day is not new. Maybe more. Right? Most of what is being used in any sort of skill set is well-established stuff. It is useful in that it survived, right? It's old because it's useful. If it weren't useful, it would have been like, tossed aside years and years ago, decades ago. So if it is old, you can probably tell this is the good shit. This is what I actually need to be learning because it's old. And that's why, like, we always reference like, Robert Collier letter book and like, marketing books from the 1920s, right? Like,
we are on some kind of ESP right now. I was just going to say, this is why we read copywriting books written decades ago.
Claude Hopkins, 1940s, I think, scientific advertising. Like, the stuff that hasn't died yet, but is old is the best stuff because it represents a majority of the corpus of what you might have to learn. And so, yeah, like, we're in a super like niche of a niche, right? Music marketing, like, who gives a shit, right? It's so small. It's so specific that like it might even be thought of as like unnecessary that we provide this specificity and sort of how you're supposed to proceed through it, but it's universal. So hopefully it's helpful here is that like there are very fundamental practices with marketing anything that you should adhere to. And the music industry is really bad about this because the music industry does have its own fundamentals for marketing, but they themselves are completely detached from the rest of the world of marketing. So yeah, like, sure, it's important to know those fundamentals as well. You should also learn the fundamentals that sort of the rest of the business world adheres to.
For sure. Yeah. I hope that this was helpful for you guys, especially y'all that are teeming with excitement and creativity about your marketing. New ways to think about old things and hopefully give you a little bit of energy around doing the fundamentals, doing the boring work, and channeling the creativity that you have into that so that you can actually do marketing that ends up with you getting more fans, that ends up with you getting more customers, and ends up with you growing your music career and not just scratching your head wondering why something didn't work.
Yes, be Larry Bird, right?
That's it.
Be Larry Bird. It's like, focus on the fundamentals. Drill the stuff that is boring because it'll just move you along a lot quicker.
100%. Thank you guys for joining us. Go get creative. We'll see you guys next time on Creative Juice. Peace.